Tēnā koutou, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa. Ko ni kāinga te maunga, ko te wairahi te awa, ko mahuhu ki te rangi te waka, o tūkai aia te kaitiaki, ko Ngāti Rehua rawa, ko whānau whiro o ngā hapu, ko Ngātiwai te iwi, ko Ngahuia Harrison ahau. Kia ora. Kia ora, I'm Ngahuia Harrison. I'm Ngātiwai, Ngātihini, Ngāti Pākehā descent, and I'm an artist and a researcher. Often in undergraduate study, you'd be asked to consider who your audience was as a mechanism for making works of art and for installation. Who are you making for? And to a certain extent, this can guide the politics of your practice. In other words, why it is that you endeavour upon certain projects. Lately, I found myself returning to this question and wondering why it is I make in particular ways and what the values are in both my research and my practice. In Te Ao Māori, the notion of mua ki muri is the way that we relate to time, which is walking backwards into the future, always looking towards those who came before you, which is also a really important idea in research to make sure you're not rehashing someone else's ideas, so being mindful of that which was done before you. With these thoughts in mind, I wanted to talk about my practice today from the perspective of my many dead grandmothers and the lessons collected from them that have become like the ribcage of the wharenui, ko te tahu, me te paupau, the support structures for my methodology in both making and research. My great-grandmother, Kahu Palmer, who married William Tim Wainanui, with whom she had 5 children. The eldest, my grandfather, pictured here with his baby sister and his mother. Still today, when people talk about Kahu and the valley that we're from, they will always say that she died of a broken heart. After suffering a profound betrayal and then with the loss of her son, Joseph, Kahu died only a few years after this image had been taken. In our wharenui, whakapaumahara and whananaki, we don't have pou or tuku panelling or kōwhaiwhai patterns. So our whakapapa, our tipuna and our histories are presented to us through photographs. And the fundamental thing for me about photos, and in particular this photo, is the epic narratives that are contained within the still image. And this photograph was my first learning about the capacity of the image. When I look at this image, I see all the lives and the stories contained within it come tumbling forward. So in my practice, I rely heavily on photography, and in particular, it's this capacity of the image to have great histories explode out of something so still. Whether it's in the decisive moment in street photography or documentary photography, distilling moments of action in real time, is still a process of narrative making on behalf of the photographer, where they point the lens, what they include, what is left out. Or more obvious forms of story making, like artist Tracy Moffat, who create photographs around creating non-fiction, quasi-non-fictions or fictions that make us question ideas of universal truths and truth-making. So I try to employ both of these in my own practice, carrying a 35mm camera and also using an iPhone to shoot and capture those more unplanned, unprecedented moments such as this, and also staging images with a large format camera. But in both instances, it's about creating this sense of narrative within the still. And from when I first picked up a camera in high school, my little brother became my most favourite person to shoot. I may be just more comfortable bossing a younger sibling around, but he is constant in my work. And fortuitously or not, the name given to him by our grandfather was Kahu. During the First World War, my great-grandparents exchanged letters. He would vaguely describe the conditions, but mostly asking of things that were going on back home in Dunedin. And she, Tibby, would respond with the goings-on of family and friends. At one point, she writes and informs him that she's going to accept another marriage proposal from a tuba player, which didn't happen, but his response, though heartbroken, was gracious and pragmatic. The sincerity of their age and the urgency of their situation is displayed in what is a really moving correspondence. And what they both say, or what they leave out, the weaving of their words while they're worlds apart from one another, really impressed upon me the weight and the capacity of writing, which has become another constant medium in my own practice, from titling works to publications. The next two slides are from an exhibit that was actually in Dunedin called You Can Eat Everything But the Rocks. And the exhibit was in response to the rising water levels and the impact that this is having, particularly on the area of South Dunedin. But text was used within the exhibit, like correspondence between two people. It was overlaid upon photographs, and in the video works it was almost like subtitling a conversation, either between two people, between a person and their environment, or perhaps even between the ocean and the land. In a more recent show in Auckland, I included works sculpturally. This work here is called Recognition Plaque, and it was a part of a show that was considering the treatment of ethnographic, specifically Pacific, collections in foreign museums. The show had come out of 6 months that I had just spent at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and the work, this work was specifically addressing the relationship in American institutions between the wealthy patrons and museums in the lack or absence of federal and state funding. Nana Martha was primed to be industrious and a fighter. Her father came from a line of whalers, and her mother was a descendant of the great Ngāpuhi rangatira Hongi Hika. Before she married my granddad and they had their 14 children, she used to build boats. She worked with her father. She was his most valued apprentice. She was also an expert diver. She was an incredibly resourceful woman. And I would imagine that being the mother of 14 children would teach anybody how to do well with little. This was a work called Bring the Islands to Your Mind, which consisted of a video that was projected onto the hull of this wooden boat I'd acquired named Martha. Being a young emergent artist in Aotearoa involves being resourceful. There's less value placed on the visual arts, which translates to less financial assistance. Arts funding, especially under our current government, has suffered, and the usual rotation of artist-run spaces in the city has decreased, in part due to the property crisis. However, you learn to do well with little. This was an artist-run exhibit and event space that I co-ran with two very dear friends, Isabel Dryber and Nicola Verdon, and we ran this in Kingsland. There's a popular anecdote in our whānau about Nana in that she could dive with no mask and no snorkel, but she always came up with the goods. And I like to think about this with projects like Plaza and the countless others around the country where artists with no snorkel and no masks are still diving in there and coming up with the goods. This is my last nana for today. This is Sarah Burkhart. She was the eldest daughter of 14 children. She's the matriarch of our whānau, and she taught us what it really means to belong to something bigger than yourself, that your whānau belong to you, that you belong to your hapu, that you all belong to your iwi. And she taught me the supreme importance of our ahika, those who stay and keep the home fires burning. So this was a year-long project with site-specific work based upon the values of manaakitanga and whanaungatanga and what it means to be guided by respect and reciprocity within a local community. And the project, which translates to let us nurture the sister and she will mourn for us, involved the restoration of our kuia's home, the same baby girl pictured in the first slide with Kahu. The project was also the starting point for my doctoral research, which is looking at the particular relationships and perceptions that Ngātiwai people have with water. And starting here in my papakainga in Whananaki, I made a series of film and photographic and sound works, but the real project was about the whakawhanaungatanga, or simply the reintroduction of family, re-relating to one another, and working together as whanaunga. And this concept of collaboration or collaborative practice has become a buzzword for artists, but for native practitioners it's a method that's somewhat of a birthright. And Auntie Sarah is our whakihead, our go-to, our chief, by design taught us our whakapapa, our kainga, tikanga, and the importance for Māori to know the network that you're intrinsically a part of. It shouldn't, however, go unsung, the thing that I learnt from my dead grandfathers. And it would seem difficult to have an opinion when surrounded by women such as these, who feel deeply, who recognise their options, who are limitlessly capable and resourceful on their own, yet are still the beating hearts of their communities. Well, you're quiet, and whakarongo mai, you listen. And this is actually an invaluable lesson for an artist, for a researcher, for anybody working in Indigenous communities or with Indigenous knowledges. You listen, as any good researcher must, but in Native communities, you have to really hear. You listen to the words and you hear all the things that cannot be expressed. Because like any trauma, colonization and the inheritance of colonization by each generation has left people, many without their native tongues, but all without any type of language to articulate the anger, shame, hurt, and loss that has been and continues to be experienced. So you make your ears intuitive to what is being unspoken. Kia mau koe ki ngā kupu o ngā tipuna. And with that, I wanted to end with the words of the eminent and departed rangatira Huni Tūwhare. Friend, in this drear, dreamless time, I clasp your hand, if only for reassurance, that all our jeweled fantasies were real and more splendid rags. Perhaps the tree will strike fresh roots again, give soothing shade to a hurt and troubled world. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.